Welcome to today's Global Connections program. How are things such as rapid technological developments, climate change, and really just many changes in the workforce affecting work of the future? Today we're going to focus on this topic because it affects all of us. Even if we're planning to retire, it will still affect us. But my guest today is an expert on this. My guest today is Mr. Vinícius Pinheiro. Mr. Pinheiro, a Brazilian national, is the director of the United Nations International Labor Organization's Office for the United Nations in New York. Prior to joining the International Labor Organization, Mr. Pinheiro was the National Secretary for the Social Security of Brazil from 1999 to 2002. Mr. Vinícius Pinheiro, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Bill. It's an honor to be here.
I appreciate you being with me. Back, we did this about 4 years ago when you first arrived, and a lot has transpired since then. Let's focus on the International Labor Organization. We'll just call it the ILO. When was the ILO formed, and why was it formed?
Yeah, we were born in 1919, Bill. So we are one of the oldest UN agencies. Actually, we're going to complete 100 years in 2019. And there are three things I think it's important to know about the ILO. The first thing is that we are for decent work for all. So we want everyone to have a good job that is freely chosen, fairly remunerated, with access to social protection, social security, that you can organize yourself in unions and proceed to collective bargaining. And the second thing is that decent work is, of course, one of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we are pretty much embedded in the 2030 agenda, in the UN agenda. And the third thing that is quite important is that we are the only UN organization that has actually a tripartite composition. So we have business, we have workers, and we have governments that are part of our governing body.
That is very important because those are the stakeholders. You've got the workers, you've got the businesses, and you have the governments, I should say.
Yes.
And it's so important to bring all three of the players together. You're probably the only UN agency that does that, I would imagine. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's an advantage because we are not only just official, in terms of when we decide on something, it has enormous outreach, legitimacy. One of our core business is precisely to define labor standards. So basically, every year we have representatives, more than 5,000 representatives from all over the world, from governments, workers, and employees, that agree on basic standards on how, for example, vacation should be organized, or how many hours one should work per week, or what is the age limit, for example, for child labor, or what is the definition of forced labor, and things that afterwards adopted by countries in the forms of conventions and recommendations, and become law at the country level. So every single law in the world on labor issues relates somehow to these labor standards that are agreed by the ILO.
That's a good segue. Why don't we, while we're talking about that, you have 4 pillars, which you've referenced a couple of them here as we've gone along. What are the, just to remind our viewers, what are the 4 pillars of the ILO, sort of the foundation for your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the definition of decent work, which has 4 pillars. The first pillar is employment. So we need to make sure the employment is freely chosen, it is exercised under certain minimum conditions that are, as I said, agreed in our labor standards, that is fairly remunerated, that delivers an income. So this is the first pillar. The second pillar is social protection. So employment has to guarantee a certain level of security to people in case of, for example, maternity, or in case of aging after retirement. So you should be entitled to a pension, disability, and others. Then there is the social dialogue, which is a kind of fundamental pillar. So workers should be able to exercise their right to collective bargaining and to be affiliated to unions and to bargain the working conditions. And finally, there should be a respect to some fundamental minimum standards related to child labor, forced labor, to non-discrimination, and this is as a whole is the definition of decent work.
Mm-hmm. Now, the ILO has been talking about decent work for years and years, and this is a concept that you know very well. You've been talking about it, and you incorporated it into your policies. And of course, this just recently came out in the Sustainable Development Goals.
Exactly.
These 17 Sustainable Development Goals adopted by the UN General Assembly in September of 2015, I believe it was. But this is a critical part of it, is it not? This decent work component?
Yeah, absolutely. There is one particular goal that's on decent work and economic growth, which is Goal 8, which is one of the core pillars of the Sustainable Development Goals. And when Goal 8 was structured, and I was part of the negotiations, the rationale behind it is very strong, because basically we can't have employment generation without economic growth. And economic growth, to be inclusive, it has to create jobs. So this is the perfect match. So this is the idea that was behind the articulation of the Sustainable Development Goal 8. And basically for the future, for 2030, the promise is full employment and productive and full productive employment and decent work for all. So this is what is spelled out in target 8.5, and it's also the goal 8. So one core question now for the agenda, for the policymakers and for all of us, will you be able to deliver on this? And what are the conditions that we need to create to deliver on decent work for all?
That full employment, before we get away from that, this is a term we've heard a lot in the United States, have lived here, and in many other countries too. Many countries have it as a stated goal to have full employment. Is that pretty consistent? I think in the United States, and I'm not an economist, but I think it means about 4% unemployment, about 96%, because you're not going to have everybody who will be able to work, or maybe their skills won't match a job. Is that a consistent term around the world, or is that just in this country, or does it vary from country to country?
Yeah, basically, sometimes you say, okay, full employment means zero unemployment, which is not true. There will always be some unemployment. There will be people looking for a job, there are people that are kind of transiting from jobs, so there will always be some frictional, let's say, unemployment. And in the United States, it's very interesting, because the objective of full employment is actually one of the mandates of the Federal Reserve. So the central bank basically sets up monetary policy on the basis of economic stability, monetary stability, and full employment. And the full employment, according to the definition, is the level of unemployment that doesn't threat monetary stability. And this could be 3%, depending on the context. This could be 3.5, sometimes 3.8. So here in the US, I mean, there is a consensus among a number of economists that US is close to full employment. No? It's not that it hasn't reached the full employment condition yet, but it's close to full employment. But in most countries, it would range between 2.5 and 3.5%, depending on the macroeconomic conditions.
Over the years, as mentioned earlier, the International Labor Organization has been talking about decent employment, decent work, that type of thing. And you've been on the cutting edge, really. You've been sort of the avant-garde of identifying a lot of these problems and offering suggestions on how to deal with them. And of course, the future of work, you have a new initiative now, the Future of Work Initiative. And I think everybody is very, regardless of whether they're retired or working, are interested in the future of work. What is this new initiative?
Yeah, because basically, since we are completing 100 years, 2019, our Director General, he said, okay, let's, of course, celebrate the wonderful things ILO did. We got the Nobel Prize in '69. You got the Nobel Peace Prize? Exactly, in '69, but because we, as a recognition for our support to social justice through our work on labor legislation, labor laws. So as I said, okay, let's celebrate the past, let's celebrate the achievements, but let's think about the future. Because this discussion about the future of work is so important for us, because I mean, as you know, there are many say, okay, there will be no jobs in the future. I mean, the robots will take over all the jobs, the work will disappear. And of course, if the work disappears, the ILO won't have any sense, right? So for us, it's a kind of existential issue, to tackle the future of work. So the Director General, he convened a major commission, a global commission on the future of work, that's actually co-chaired by the Prime Minister of Sweden and the President of Mauritius. They will be look they'll be looking at the different global trends that are shaping the future of work, as how these trends are affecting work and society, where are the new jobs that what are the sectors that will generate the new jobs, what are the sectors that will perhaps shrink with the evolution in the labor markets, how does it connect with demographic dynamics and the climate change and environmental changes as well, and come up with a report by the end of 2018 that will actually be discussed in the ILO Labor Conference in 2019. And from there will be perhaps a decision, a declaration that could be the first, let's say, political a decision on how to shape the future of work we want. And this commission will benefit a lot from a national consultation. So there were consultations in more than 146 countries. They all hosted like a national dialogue on the future of work to understand what's the future of work for them and what are the main forces, because it's not, the discussion is quite different if you compare the US, for example, and Vietnam or France and Argentina. There are different structures, different forces in places, different stakeholders. So it's very important to get a global picture. So this commission is looking at the results of a series of national dialogues that were organized over the last 2 years as well.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We would invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you are involved with any type of a PBS or community access television station, or you're with an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website and you have an interest in our programs, please go to our website and upload these programs and share them with anyone that you would like. Global Connections Television is provided free of charge as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're taking a look at a unique United Nations agency, the International Labor Organization, and what it's doing to identify trends that are going to affect our future work opportunities, or maybe some lack of opportunities. And my guest today is an expert on this. My guest is Mr. Vinícius Pinheiro. Mr. Pinheiro, a Brazilian national, is the director of the International Labor Organization's office at the United Nations in New York. We're talking about the future of work and this commission that you have set up and the goal to come up with recommendations. But as of today, I know you've looked into this, your organization, many others have looked at it. What are some of the trends that we know that are developing now? You mentioned climate change, you mentioned robotics, artificial intelligence. What are some of the ones that are affecting work today and will certainly affect work tomorrow that we could hone in on and maybe talk about a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. We are talking about 4 mega trends. The first one and the most, let's say, discussed is precisely technology. So how technology is changing the number and the quality of jobs. Now, we know, for example, there is a discussion about robotics, that robots will take over some or at least part of some jobs. So we were very interested in knowing exactly what type of transformation we'll have in terms of sectors and in terms of tasks within the same job. So this is the one of the dimensions of the discussion. Also, technology through the gig economy, from this crowdsourcing platforms, is changing the nature of work as well. So people are working from home. The issue of time, how you organize the relationship between employer and employees, also changing. We got all this the share economy principles in which we don't have a fixed, let's say, employer, and you can work how many hours necessary, or the issue of the own time and on-demand services. So it's changed a lot, and the number of people in non-standard forms of work is also increasing. For example, in the UK, you have this 0-hour contracts. That's more and more people are kind of
0-hour contract.
Exactly. So basically,
how does that work?
you receive by your your product. You don't have any, like say, minimum salary or any income unless you deliver, and you get paid by the
like
tasks.
The old piecework, is that what it would be? Something like that, where you produce so many widgets and you get paid X amount for a widget?
Exactly. And pretty much focus on tasks, not too much in the final product, but you are paid by tasks. So this is increasing. Of course, it will have a huge impact in the number of jobs, but also in the quality of jobs. So in how many jobs will be generated, from here to 2030, we need to generate 40 million jobs a year. And if you think that there is already 200 million people that are unemployed, so that makes 600 million jobs that will need to be created from here to 2030.
And most of those are in developing countries,
Most in developing countries, exactly. And in some cases, technology can, let's say, labor-saving technology can have huge impacts for example, in the garment sector, in other sectors that are quite important. So this technology bit is very, very important, of course, having a closer look at it. The second one is climate change and the transition towards low-carbon economy, which hopefully will happen. So in this case, we have some data that provides us actually a very positive picture, because the green economy is more labor intensive than the fossil fuel economy. So by moving towards a greener, let's say, economic production patterns or also consumption patterns, we will be able to generate more jobs. But of course, this is not given, so it's not going to happen automatically. So we need the adequate skills training programs, adequate social protection programs, to equip this labor force to the new, let's say, the green economy. So, but this is also part of the future of work. The third component is the demographic change. Some countries are experiencing a youth boom, so big, let's say, chunk of the population are growing older and are getting to the labor force. That's where the big part of this 40 million are coming from. So we need to generate jobs for them. In other countries, there's a very accelerated aging process, and actually automation can help, in particularly the health sector. So this has to be taken into account as well. And the fourth, let's say, big megatrend is related to the globalization itself, the trend to income concentration, and how, for example, policies restricting trade and migration will affect the labor market. The backlash against globalization that we're seeing in some countries. So this is all these, let's say, megatrends are into play in defining, shaping the future of work.
And there were so many fascinating items that you threw out there. One, well, they all caught my attention, but one in particular was you were talking about how the fossil fuel industries are really losing jobs. They're more labor. I mean, you actually create more jobs by going with clean energy, like solar power plant panels or something like that. And I think that's true today. I recall seeing an article that there are like 250,000 jobs in the United States working in the solar field, and in coal mining, for example, there's like 18,000, and they're dropping. Coal is dead. Coal is a dying industry, and it's not going to be resurrected, primarily because of gas. Fracking is what's really happening, and that's reduced it. But that is fascinating, and that's a tremendous argument to help us move away from these fossil fuels, which we know are leaving a huge carbon footprint, creating climate change, global warming, and move into cleaner forms of energy. Yeah.
No, and just to say, I mean, the coal mine, not only the coal mine, but mining in general, is very much automated. Could you imagine how was mining like 200 years ago, which was one of the main drivers actually for the migration towards the West, and how many people we have now, Most of the tasks, unfortunately, because these are very hazardous tasks, have been taken over by automation and by robots. No? So this is one of the sectors that will probably automate as quick as possible in a let's say, in a more accelerated pace than the green, types of jobs. So to make a solar panel, for example, you require much more workforce, than to extract, minerals.
Is the is this automation taking place using robots and what have you? It was primarily, it used to be years ago just in the economically developed countries, but I would imagine it's also happening very quickly in the economically developing countries, is it not? Where you really had labor-intensive projects. Maybe you'd have 15 workers working on a particular problem with a road or something. Today you might have a machine and two workers. Is it apply not equally, but it is happening in the economically developing countries?
No, absolutely, it's happening everywhere, and it's happening as well across the supply chain, but across the different types of jobs. Now, because in the past we thought of automation would affect only let's say manual, low-skilled types of jobs. But now it's also getting to like a more high-skilled types of jobs. But the thing of automation is not that you will replace a worker. They will get a robot to replace a person. But the idea is to make it easier for the person. So we have to find ways in which we use technology actually to make it easier for those operating this technology to deliver on the product. Of course, it will require a huge investment on skills development. So what are the new types of skills that will be needed, not only for the new generation, but also for the generation that is currently in the labor market. So they'll think about associating or integrating, AI and machine learning, robots in general within a job by replacing some of the tasks, but to make it easier for the worker, to deliver on their, deliver the outcomes of their work.
We're seeing more and more estimates of, especially with the driverless automobiles, driverless trucks that are going from point A to point B. And some of the economists are estimating that just in the United States alone, like 7 million truck drivers will be out of business if they do develop these trucks, and they're moving forward in many areas of the country. And of course, as you mentioned, it's going on around the world. Even though there will be some new jobs created through this automation, but that's still, it seems like it leaves a large pool of workers who are going to have to be retrained, have to look for new jobs, some who may not be able to be retrained for one reason or another. But as I look through that, well, I'm interested, do you think that's what's going to happen, or do you think that's fairly accurate?
No, some sectors there will be an impact, but as you said, I mean, this is a matter of training, reskilling, and reallocating people. And one thing that is quite important is the provision of social protection. So in the meantime, when someone, let's say, will lose the job or for some reason be displaced, it's very important to have a kind of social protection system that will allow the person to replace the income while it's being trained. So that's this is going to happen, but it has happened, I mean, throughout history and in many occasions, and we found a way to retrain and to replace and to, let's say, allocate the person to a different job. But one of the most important messages of the work of this commission is that the future of work is not predetermined. So we have the power as to make technology work for us, not the other way around. So even when designing, for example, entire sectors in terms of how in terms of oligopolistic rules, or even when defining, for example, the gig economy or the non-standard forms of work, they will have to comply with certain minimum labor principles. So we have the power to make these rules, and to enhance governance across governance about on the new emerging trends. So this is something that we and our institutions could be capable to regulate.
And we're going to have to do that because the technology, as you mentioned, it's just breaking so quickly, and it's affecting, it seems like it's moving exponentially into this area. But our viewers, if they would like to follow up on this, they can go to your website at www.ilo.org and get more information on what we're talking about today. But there are so many other parts of it that we did not have a chance to discuss, excuse me, that I hope we can get back later and talk about. For example, example, how will economies change? Will this, when you talk about social protection, the economy may change quite dramatically because the current social network or the safety net may not be sufficient to help these workers, or if we have more and more people in the unemployed field and not contributing financially, who's going to pay for the pension programs? But these are all problems that you're going to be dealing with, and I'm sure very effectively. But Mr. Vinícius Pinheiro, Director of the United Nations International Labor Organization in New York, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.